Welcome everybody to our DAFEUS webcast on federalism and crisis management. Well, we are currently living in times of a global health crisis, the corona pandemic, and during the last year, the states dealt very, very differently with management of the corona crisis. But when following the international press, Germany as a federal state is often considered as a positive example on how to manage the corona crisis. However, in Germany, criticism of the government's crisis management rises. So I'm very happy to talk today to Professor Macholt on the role of federalism in crisis management and maybe also on his challenges and advantages. Professor Macholt is Senior Research Fellow at the Centre International de Formation Européenne, and he also teaches at the University of Cologne and the Turkish-German University in Istanbul. He's also Vice President of the Institut für Europäische Politik in Berlin, and he specialized in the history of European integration and also the issue of federalism. So thank you for being here today, Professor Macholt. So my first question would be on the efficiency of federalism. Is federalism actually efficient to take fast decisions in times of crisis, as there are often situations where fast decisions are needed? So is federalism efficient enough?
Thanks first for inviting me to think together with you about federalism and crisis solutions. First, I would distinguish between efficiency and being fast. It is obvious that this crisis needs rapid reactions. It doesn't wait for a long time before it hits and has disastrous consequences. So political reaction, measures taken must be taken quickly, no doubt. But still, efficiency is another criteria. And what we saw in the Federal Republic was, in my eyes, relatively efficient over the last months. Whether the link, a second remark, is more of a methodological. The first one was terminological, so to say. The second one is methodological, but we will certainly come to the substance. Methodological. We observe different evolutions of infections in different countries. And we observe that different countries have different political systems. But whether there is a causal link between success and the nature of the political system, or whether there are other factors which have an impact on success or failure, is rather difficult to say. It is not self-evident that countries who are successful are so because of their political system. It may be the education of the population, it may be the health system, it may be the experience with other crises. There are a lot of other potential factors which could have an impact on efficiency. So let us do it with a very cautious conscience when we link success or failure in fighting the crisis to the nature of the political system, more centralized or more federal. But again, I feel that the political system in Germany delivered, and delivered in due time. Whether this was despite or because of federalism, we can discuss, but that's already another question.
So what do you think? Do you think it was despite or because of? So what's your personal view? I mean, we can discuss the whole evening about this, I guess. So And
I
we
would
want
say
to
the speed of the reaction was despite. The efficiency was because of.
Okay, that's interesting, and maybe this also leads me to my next question, because do you think that federalism leads to a kind of fragmentation of different rules and laws within a country? I mean, in Germany or also in other countries? Because that's what has been often criticized in Germany, that, well, in Bavaria, there are different rules than in Saxony or in Berlin. So there was kind of, criticism on it.
Yes, I followed this discussion, and I got upset, to be frank, with this discussion, because already fragmentation. We have in German an even more negative term. We use Flickenteppich. That is a patchwork approach. Why should we not call it a differentiated approach? The situation is differentiated, is different in many regions and even local areas in Germany. Why should a homogeneous, a unified, a unique approach be better adapted to a differentiated situation than at what you call a fragmented and what I would call a differentiated one? Federalism allows for a more differentiated approach. And that's one of the reasons why I would say federalism can be more efficient in such complicated situations, because a complicated reality is better translated into complicated responses and answers, even structurally, by the complicated federal system. So to be complex is not an inconvenient in a situation in which the reality is complex. A federal system has much more possibilities, much more options to react in a differentiated way. I remember a moment when the Prime Minister of Lower Saxony said, "Why should I close down the northern parts of my region? Why should I deny people to go to work, to go out, children to go to school in parts of my region where there has never been any case of corona?" I feel he was right. Why should we penalize people who are far away from hotspots? So I would refuse to call it differentiated or patchwork with any negative connotation. I feel that a differentiated approach is adapted to a differentiated challenge. And federalism has certainly, probably, more options to react in a differentiated way than a very centralized system.
Okay, so maybe let's talk about decision making in these days. So we saw not very often, always, that the Conference of Ministers, the Ministerpräsidentenkonferenz in German, came together, took decisions, would then have been implemented at the federal level, of course. But this has been criticized a lot also by the opposition in the German parliament. So do you think parliaments are losing control in times of crisis? And is there a dominance of the executives?
It is, but that's the mark of any crisis. The crisis is the moment of the executives, even in democracy and even in federal systems with all their checks and balances. The opposition, once again, I do not want to defend ideologically federalism, but in a federal system, at least in the German federal reality, what is the opposition at the federal level is part of the governments at the regional level. So it is still executives, but nearly, except if I'm right, the right-wing populists are AfD. But all the other parties which are in opposition in the Bundestag, in the federal parliament, are somewhere in the governments of the regions. So they're sitting around the table, even if the governments of the regions come together. Yes. Federalism provides as well an opportunity to take into account, to bring in the political arena more interests than a centralized system, which is very often based on the assumption that a 51% majority is sufficient to legitimate decisions by a government or a president for all the rest of the country and all the 49 other percent. In the German Conference of the Prime Ministers, there is one Green, one Left, there are Social Democrats, there are Christian Democrats, and even in, if I'm right, in one or two countries, there are the Liberals still part of the government. So nearly all the parties represented in the German parliament, once again, except the right-wing populists, are represented most often in person in this body of the Conference of the Prime Ministers. So I think it is a problem between executive and legislative power in democracy. But again, the advantage of a federal system is to integrate more political forces than in a centralized system.
So, and don't think that there is a problem in legal terms then, because that's often mentioned by the opposition, especially also by the right wing, the AfD in Germany, that it's against our laws and our Grundgesetz, for example, that this conference of the prime minister shouldn't have or doesn't have this power to take these decisions and these, as they call it, hard measures for our daily lives. So do you think
it is not by chance that the criticism comes from the only party who is not represented in this body and the only party who is ready to spread doubts about the legitimacy of our political system on the whole. So I would say I fully trust in the constitutional court in Germany, which would certainly rule out an anti-constitutional procedure in the corona crisis policy. So I do not see any, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutionalist, but I'm a political observer. And I do not see any serious move in the field, in the arena of constitutional legitimacy against the procedure which has been applied until now. By the way, as well at the federal as at the regional level, governments promised to leave more room for parliamentary debate on the measures to be taken. But once again, in all crises, when efficiency and fast decisions are required, parliaments are most often reduced to a post factum control and not to deliberations which would come into conflict with the other requirement you put in your first question, that is quick reactions.
Yeah. So
Parliament can sanction governments. That's still right, and that is still possible in this situation too. Sanction afterwards, but not prevent them from taking decisions in critical situations.
I see. So thank you very much, Professor Marhold. for this interesting short discussion on federalism and crisis management.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks to you. Have a nice evening.
You too. Thanks.